And that's how we start. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Talk to Me. I got Mr. Nick Barr here with me today, and we're going to talk. Well, he's gonna talk to me.
I'm going to talk to you.
What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing great.
You just got done work?
Yeah, you
Everything
can
is-
tell it by my hands. I painted.
Yep. No leprosy around these parts?
No,
just
don't.
paint.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Even if my skin's peeling off.
Oh, man. I met you a couple months ago, and randomly at a pancake party. And we were discussing just different theological things and everything. And we're like, hey, we should probably meet up. I mentioned I had a podcast, so we wanted to meet up for coffee. Had a great conversation, and honestly, I can't tell you, like, you're one of the most genuine people I've met in my life. Honestly, I mean, like, just the way that we had that conversation there at the cafe it was real, it was raw, it was honest, and I'm glad to say that we're pretty good friends right now.
I would say
know?
so too.
So, the people that may not know you or kind of your life, you've been through a lot, at least some of the parts that you've told me. So, why don't you just kind of go into a bit of your personal testimony, like how you got through some of the struggles in your life, what led you to God, being brought up with God, but how he really just saturated your heart.
Yeah, definitely. So I was born in Lancaster County, but I was born in a very broken family. I never knew my biological dad, and I lived with my biological mom with a bunch of siblings, but my biological mom she was a mess. She had a lot of heartbreak. She was doing a lot of drugs. So I was bounced around. Yeah. And somehow the state heard about what was going on in that family. And so they took me out, put me in emergency foster care. What's crazy about this is my parents, my adopted parents right now, a month before I came, they had lost a case.
Oh.
Yeah. Jeez. And then a month later, or it was around that time, the agency that had me called them and was like, "Hey, we have this child." And my parents were like, they didn't want to do it because they were grieving, but they felt like they should. Yeah. So they took me in. And that's awesome. I was 4 when that happened, and then when I was 6, I got adopted. So I wish I could say it was all roses, like Disney. No, happy ever after. It wasn't. There was a mess. Yeah. My beginning years was a mess. I was a mess. My parents were a mess. And it led me to just, when I was 13, just being super bitter. Yeah. When I was 9, I made a profession because I felt like because my adopted family are believers. They're Christians. Yeah. And so I kind of felt like if I made that kind of profession, then maybe things would be easier, specifically with my mom and I. Yeah. Didn't happen. Yeah. So coming into that family, I kind of had a concept of God, but I really didn't have a thought. Like if I was 6 years, well, I'm 25 right now. So how many years ago, until I was 6, and you were to sit down and say, "So Nick, tell me about God," I would have been like, I have no concept. Right? Yeah. But I remember this moment. I shared my testimony a while back, and this hit me, and I was like, wow, like, this is crazy. So I was in my room. I was punished. I don't know what I did wrong. Yeah. Something I did wrong. And I was sitting in my room, and I was sitting there, and I was like, God, what is happening? Now, like I said, I didn't really have a concept of God. I really didn't have a concept of prayer. I was just kind of like, well, everyone around me right now believes in this God. So like, God, what are you doing? Right. And I was sitting there, I was silent. And then I had all these thoughts going in my head. And then this voice came in my head and said, in due time, you'll understand. Ooh. And that was it. Ooh.
And this is how old?
I was 7 years old.
So you're coming into, basically like core memories sticking.
Yes.
Yes. in that age. Yeah. And I wouldn't really say adolescent age, but this is where you really start to develop those things and you hear this voice. Yeah. That's awesome. Again,
I wish I could say it was like, oh, I heard God. And I was like, wow, suffering. No, it didn't happen. I was more confused and more angry after I heard that.
It's like, is there a manual that you can?
Well, at 7, I was kind of like, wait, what did I just hear? Yeah. Like, who said that? But so anyway, so at 13 years old, we grew up. I was really, really bitter. Yeah. Fell into pornography and stuff like that. But outwardly, I was like this funny guy. Yeah. I was super casual. Good. What was it? where you have this good luck charm or whatever, this go lucky attitude, you know, type of thing. But inside I was just angry and bitter. And then this was up till I was 17 years old, and I felt in my heart, like I could not say I was a Christian, and yet do what I wanted to do because I didn't want anything really to do with God, because I was super angry. And so I was like, you know what, I can't be on the fence, which is weird because at that time, like I wouldn't have cared, because my attitude was like, well, whatever would get people to like me more and love me more, I'll do. But I don't know, for maybe that's conviction of God. I have no idea. But all I could tell you was I knew I couldn't stay like that. And so out of the blue, this church I was going to, this gentleman invited me to this youth conference down in Greenville, South Carolina. Okay. And the only reason I went, there weren't good reasons. Number one, it was out of state and I wouldn't be with my parents. And number two, there were going to be a bunch of girls there. So I was like, why not? You know, parents and girls. What can I say? So
great summer vacation.
Exactly. Woo. So off I went with a group of teenagers down to Greenville, South Carolina. And I got on. So it was at this small Bible school, and I got there, and it was the first time I ever encountered the presence of God. Okay. Like and what I mean by that is I got on the campus, I got out of the van, and I knew that there was something it wasn't the campus. It wasn't even the people. It was like there was something very different about this place. And I was like, this is weird. I've never experienced this before. And of course, when I was there, the people there were great. They had love. They had joy. I was like, okay, didn't really understand. I didn't see joy and Christianity, coexist. And so, long story short, Wednesday night, God gripped my heart. And I went to my room, which again, that's a story in of itself, how I got there. But I went to my room. And I was like, I had it with God. I was like, and then after I was done, it was silent. And then God just spoke. And I can't tell you what he spoke to me, but it was super personal. And it broke me. And I bawled like a baby. And then I went back to the place where we're at, and I just kind of worshiped. Nothing really changed. And then the next morning I woke up and I had so much joy. Wow. It was like when David prays, like, restore to me the joy of my salvation. That's what I felt like. I was like, whoa. So even though I made a profession, I would tell people that 17 was the day that or the year that I gave my heart to the Lord. Yeah. And after that, again, wasn't roses or sunshine. Never is. But it's definitely been a whole different foundation and ball game in life. So after that, graduated, came to college. After college, moved back up here. And now I'm here. Yeah. Well, I think that's so cool because you said a lot there with the, you hear this voice when you're 6 and you keep going through the years. You don't quite understand it. You hit this spot when you're 17, but then everything's not roses. The walk with the Lord just keeps going and going and going until it just breaks you down. So now you are here, but another cool thing that you have done since you've been back is you joined the Marines. Yes. And that's awesome. Yes. How do you find one, how is that? And two, how do you find being able to, tell people about your experience, your faith, what you believe in through that? Because, people would look at that and say, how is this guy a Christian and a Marine, No, that's a great 2 questions. How is it joining the Marines? It's absolutely miserably fun. I love that definition. It really is. Boot camp's miserable and it's fun. MCT, which is your combat training, is miserable and it's fun. The schoolhouse is boring and it's fun. Then you get to your unit and then you're like, wow, I did all this for this. It's fun. Worth it. Exactly. But when it comes to being open about my faith in the Marine Corps, I would actually be honest with you and tell you, a lot of the guys are open to talk. Like, I don't know. Before I joined the Marine Corps, people were like, well, you can't really be open about your faith in the Marine Corps, or specifically in the military in general. Because, you might just get kicked out. And from what I've experienced, most of the people it's been other people who have come up to me asking me the questions. So for example, there was a time I was in the schoolhouse and I was getting my hair cut and I was chilling out with the guys and we're laughing and talking. And then this guy turned to me and he's like, I have a question for you. I was like, sure. And he's like, why is it, he's like, well, it's like, I used to go to church and everything, but like, I'd be trying to do these good things, but like, life just, I'm not going to use his words, but it sucked. And he's like, so I don't really see a reason why to believe in God or do any things, but like, why do you do that?
Yeah.
And then he asked me different questions. I had a guy in my unit come up to me and ask me, he's like, I'm really intrigued because I know that you're a Christian. How can you reconcile killing people when you believe a God that's loving? I was like, that's a good question. I'll talk to you about that. And then my country sergeant walked up to me, and he's a little more like in your face. He's like, yeah, I know you're a Christian, all right? So you tell me this. And he started asking all these questions. I was like, dude, like in my mind, I wasn't like scared to answer them or like even, because the thing is, it's not like I just answer them. Like I know that they're on a journey, right? So I'm like tapping, like, Lord, like, where are they at in their journey? What do you want me to share? But for me, I've been more taken back by the fact of, wow, I'm not having this even, but like, can I tell you about Jesus? Like, it's not happening. Like, when they have sincere questions, they're gonna ask. So back to your question, how is it sharing my faith? It's super simple. Yeah. Is it? Do I experience like pushback on people sharing my faith? Not really, but I think that's because I do a different method than how other people would take it. Most people would be maybe a little more evangelistic, so they'd be doing more of like, well, let me ask you this. Let me, they're more on the aggressive side of going after. Yeah. For me, it's just like the way I see it is that they're on a journey, right? And God's the one who's going to reveal Himself, right? So I'm going to wait for Him to reveal Himself to them in their journey, and how big or small it is, they're going to know that there's somebody that they can go to who's me, and they can start asking those questions.
Just opening that door up and that's so cool how they would just come up, and just start asking things like that. Simple, man. Very simple, very simple. So what are some of those things that you do though? Like, what's some of the simple methods that you use in that scenario? Maybe to help someone else that may be thinking of, like, because I know a lot of people that go out and they just want to go straight to evangelism, and they do the thing. And I've said this on here so many times, so don't take this personally, but it's the whole, do you know Jesus kind of thing. And exactly. to me, when I go out, that never worked. And it to me, it doesn't, but it may to some people. I can't dictate how the Lord works, but what I mean.
I'm right there with you. So one of the things is I'm not afraid to demonstrate that I'm a Christian. And I do it authentically, which means, I'm not I'm not like grabbing my food, sitting down and waiting till a bunch of guys come around me and then start. I'm like, oh, I know they're gonna be I'm not doing that, right? I have no problems like when I'm sharing about like a hardship or I am sharing about something that I'm celebrating. I have no problem being like, hey, this is what God's done for me. And they're like, okay. So what I'm doing is I'm making it obvious that, yes, I'm a Christian. Not only am I a Christian, but God is a part of my life, right? And so in doing that, it immediately creates a door of, okay, so if I got questions, I can go to this dude, right? Another one is, like I mentioned, is I wait for God to reveal Himself to them, and anywhere, shape, or form. And so, for example, trying to think of an example. So in boot camp, a couple of buddies of mine would have like a small Bible study. And they would try to get people they know that weren't believers to join the Bible study. I was like, nah, like if their whole life they never wanted to go to a Bible study, what's going to make them want to go to a Bible study now? Just because they got some buddies that want to have a Bible study. That's just how I think. But it was interesting. We had one guy who came after the Bible study and sat with us, and he started to open up and saying, "Hey, like I used to go to church, yada yada yada. Life happened, don't really go anymore. But being here, things are being stirred in me." Because what's interesting is in basic training, they encourage you to go to church.
Interesting.
Yeah, they encourage you to express your faith.
All right.
And there's reasons for that. I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah. Now, is that just with Christianity, or is that any type of faith?
Any type of faith.
Okay.
Yeah, but the majority of people will go to either a Catholic mass or to church.
Okay.
So, or Christian church I'll put it that way, because there's there's Jewish church synagogues, and not actual synagogues, but they would use the same building.
I was gonna say they build a whole entire.
They don't have a mosque there.
A whole entire temple just on the corner.
Listen, it's the third temple. What are you talking about? I'm kidding. Anyway, so in that moment for me, here's this guy sitting. He's saying now he used to go to church, yada yada, not going anymore. Doesn't really have anything to do with God. Yeah. But all of a sudden he's here and there's things being stirred in him. He doesn't really know what it is, but something's being stirred. I see that God's working, right? So then I start engaging with conversations by asking questions. Yeah. That's my last thing is I ask questions. Because in asking questions, number one, you get the other person to think, right? Amen. Now most people are used to being preached at. Yes. So that's why. And I agree with you. It's not saying the method is wrong, but with our culture today, most people are used to being preached at or teached at. So what I mean is, you're sitting listening to someone talk or whatever, right? Yeah. So 9 times out of 10, it's going to go through this ear, not the other. Yeah. And then we pray that somewhere that little gold nugget is going to go whoop down, right? On down. And then God's going to make that grow, right? Yeah. But what's interesting is if you look at Jesus, he asked questions. Yeah. He asked questions of religious people, asked questions of non-religious people, right? So, in asking questions, you get people to think. And not only do you get people to think, you get them to interact. Yeah. And then you also get to watch the questions that you ask. You can see if it's emotional. So, for example, if you ask that and they put their head down or they start tearing up or smile or whatever, okay. So you also get to see how they're emotionally engaging with your question. Instead of just simply here's my testimony. Do you want to say Jesus in your heart? And all they're doing is just sitting, because they just sit and stare at you. Yeah. And you have no idea. Some may nod the head, some of them may just stare at you, and you have no idea. There's no intimacy. Exactly. There's you're not even building any type of connection. No. So that's the way I do it. And is it effective? I can't tell you. Sure, I haven't had anyone say, I want to pray the sinner's prayer, but I don't think having someone pray the sinner's prayer is evidence of them actually being I gave my heart to Christ. Because that surely wasn't my testimony. Yeah. Right? So trying to remember the 3 things I mentioned. Asking questions. Oops, sorry, hit the mic. Asking questions, waiting for God to reveal himself. And there was another one I mentioned in the beginning, but I can't remember.
You said asking questions, waiting for God to reveal himself, and I think that's all you said, right? Or did you say something in the beginning?
I think there was one thing I said. I don't remember.
I'm a horrible host. Now I forget what you said. I'm listening. I promise you I'm listening.
I'm horrible at conversations. I say one thing, it's you remember saying this? I'm like, nah, I never said that.
We didn't talk about that at all.
You said, I did say that.
Who are you?
Do we have to restart?
Well,
my testimony is.
Yeah, exactly. Back in 1996. So, do you view that as a form of discipleship?
Absolutely.
In a way.
Yeah. So.
Segue.
Yeah, segue. Right. So I would argue, and so I'll say this before I mention anything about discipleship and evangelism. These things may be controversial. Okay, so I'm just gonna put it out there because.
Spoiler, not spoiler.
Yeah,
what's it called?
Spoiler or warning?
What do you call it? Trigger warning?
Trigger warning, right.
Anyway.
This may trigger you.
This is the wrong type of interview.
Yeah, someone's going to be out there like, you heretic. I call yourself a Christian. Anyway.
Y'all smell smoke?
Oh, man. So, I actually do not believe that there's a difference between evangelism and discipleship. I actually would argue that scripturally, evangelizing and discipleship are the exact same thing. And what do I mean by that? So when we talk about evangelism, we say, when we think about evangelism, let me put it that way. We tell people about Jesus to get them to a place where they make a profession to Jesus, right? And then after evangelism, then we go into discipleship, where we then walk with them and they learn how to walk with Jesus. What I find interesting, and actually when I was studying this, it's God uses the same thing in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I'll take, for example, Jesus. When Jesus called his disciples, none of them believed that Jesus was God None of them believed that he was going to die on a cross and be risen from the dead. They definitely didn't believe that they were going to receive the Spirit, right? They had an inch maybe that he was the Messiah, okay? But for them, their understanding even Messiah was wrong. You know, they were looking for a king that was actually going to sit on Jerusalem's throne and overthrow the Romans, right? That's why when he's like, "Hey, I'm going to die," they're like, "Whoa, that doesn't fit in my."
We didn't sign up for this. Jesus.
Yeah, and Peter goes like, "You're not going to die."
Yeah. He was right.
Yeah. So what Jesus did though was he came up to them and he said, "Follow me." And Scripture says they followed him.
You know what's crazy about that too? I'm rereading all the Gospels right now. You know, so I read Matthew and Mark, and I'm finishing up Luke right now. But when I was reading Matthew, I don't know how many times I've read that book, and it didn't hit me that Simon Peter follows him. And literally the next line it says, and Simon's wife's mother, or his mother-in-law, got a sickness. And I was like, he was married.
Yeah.
It's just like, you know, that didn't even hit me.
Yeah.
And like when he says, you know, leave wife or husband or child and, you know, all that and everything like that. And I just started looking into that. Like he literally left everything to follow somebody that he didn't even know. And regardless, I mean, you can, you know, and again, this might be heretic and everything like that. But, you know, even if the story is over-exaggerated, I still believe everything happened in that, you know? And it's just like, so he left everything that he had to go follow him, regardless of what it was.
Well, what's crazy is he left after he had that encounter with Jesus with the fish.
Yep. One fish.
Did that completely make him believe that everything about Jesus? No. It wasn't until he walked with Jesus until he came to this revelation like, oh, you actually are the Son of God. And what's interesting is none of the other disciples had that revelation. It was only Peter.
Just him.
And Jesus calls it out. He says, you received that by the Spirit.
Yep.
None of his disciples received that. And then when he rises from the dead, right?
Yeah.
He goes into heaven, and Luke says there were some who still doubted him.
Yep.
So like, where do we like? So for me, when I think about discipleship, Jesus didn't care whether they made a profession or not, because discipleship was about following Jesus and coming to a place of greater revelation of him and becoming like him.
Absolutely.
So now Old Testament. So I love the story of Abraham because it's very similar because Abraham lives in this society that is has a lot of gods, and they worship their gods, and out of their worship and their religiosity, they have their culture, right? And Abraham's right along with that. It's not like he's any different, right? And all of a sudden he gets, I believe I'm right, he gets a vision. Or I'm not sure if Scripture makes it clear he had a vision. It just says that maybe God spoke to him. I don't quite remember.
Okay.
But either way, the emphasis is on the vision. The fact is that God spoke to him and said, I want you to pick up everything and I want you to leave to go to this land I'm not going to tell you about, right? And I'm not going to tell you where it is.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And
for some reason, Abraham decides to uproot his whole family, which is not just his wife and his belongings. He uproots his whole family because he's the head of his clan now. Yeah. His father's died. His father's dead. He uproots his whole clan and moves.
Yep.
He has no idea who this God is. It isn't until King Melchizedek tells him about who God is, and he reveals King Melchizedek reveals God as Almighty God. And then after that, Abraham uses that name to address God.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm thinking, okay, so if the emphasis isn't about getting people to a place where they make a profession and walking with God, but actually walking with them right from the beginning, even if they make a profession or not, continually walking with them and calling them to obedience to God, to however He's speaking to them and revealing Himself. Because at the end of the day, if we really believe in the power and the work of the Spirit of God will always bring them to Jesus.
Amen. Yeah.
So for me, I don't really evangelize. Like I mentioned within the Marine Corps, my focus is paying attention to what the Spirit is doing in people's lives, and then partnering with the Spirit of God. And so that's what also, for example, when it comes to with Matthew, it's really interesting that Jesus doesn't go to Capernaum and call Matthew right away. He does a bunch of signs, right?
Yep.
He's walking around, he's showing all these miracles, and then he calls Matthew, which is interesting because for us, when we kind of jump into the story, and you know, I could be wrong about this, but it's clear to me that reading those stories and then coming to the place of Matthew, the reason that Matthew had any inclination of following Jesus is because all the things that happen in Capernaum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in people's lives, there are things that are going to happen that I can pray for and see God answer.
Yeah.
And whether that's a big miracle or small miracle, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, if I'm praying and I see God answer in the person I'm praying for in their life, then hey, God's after them.
Yeah.
And I can partner with that.
Yep.
Right.
And in so doing that, it's not you.
Exactly. Yeah. And in so doing that, I can share with them that, hey, I prayed for you for this, and I saw God answer that. And they're like, okay. And then you start walking with them.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to with discipleship, that's why I don't believe in evangelism. Now, I'm not saying that you can't just walk up and be like, hey, I want to tell you about Jesus. Yeah. You know, I'm not saying that method.
But your outcome to, and this is solely my opinion, your outcome to that better be that you are planning to walk with that person, or if not, inviting them into community for someone to be able to walk with them. And that's why, I forget what book it is, but it was a book about, you know, and we've talked about this, you know, where it's hard. I'm going to catch 22 here. Yeah. I believe that we should go throughout the whole world. Yeah. I do. But at the same time, you know, a lot of missionaries go, they set up, they leave. Yeah. And they don't stay and walk through. And there was the book about the Buddhist man who they came in, they told this family, you know, you're going to hell if you don't accept Jesus. They fell down. They were scared. They accepted Jesus, and they just left them. And the whole family got torn apart because some stayed Buddhist, some didn't. There was dissension, and the whole family got broken up. And the man in the book says, this is why I hate Christianity, is because they came in and ruined my family. Yeah. And there was no evidence of walking. Yeah. Now, I know a gentleman that has been in Africa for God only knows how long, I think 8 to 10 years now, who has set up church there, who has stayed with these people, you know, and is walking with them and continuously walking with them, and has you know, you've seen pastors and priests and everything come up out of that nation, that area where he came from. So yeah, I agree with you 100%, and I think that's where we here in America are so comfortable with, you know, traditional church ways that discipleship is completely missed, because discipleship isn't just meeting up once a month with someone to go get coffee and being like, how are you doing? Here's some of my life advice. Yeah. And we've had that conversation too about, should discipleship only be an older person sowing into a younger person? Can it be opposite? You know, I've told you my story with, you know, what happened with that. Talked to the guy the other day too. Anyway, but it's like, I see this in the Bible, and I see what you're saying too. And, you know, the story of Abraham, you know, that all came down to faith in God too. You know, this is a God that he knew, I think, but also didn't know at the same time. Exactly. So it's all new to him.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't like his faith was ginormous. Yeah. Like, he just obeyed. Like, that was simple. And his faith had to grow. He struggled with his faith. Yeah. Right. But God kept coming to him, revealing himself. God kept speaking to him, kept discipling him. Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't mean to spit. No, I didn't even see. He kept discipling him until he came to a place where God ultimately said, hey, I want you to sacrifice your son. Right? And he went up to a mountain, and God said, you know, don't do it. Yeah. And so that's why, like, for me, I'm like, okay, so because the other thing too is, in the church, we are so focused, and I love what you said about with that Buddhist man, because we're so focused on getting a profession, right? So as long as we get a profession, then hey, this person is a Christian. But a Christian is Christ-likeness. Yeah. Right? So we kind of get this idea, and this is really geared towards more of the charismatic understanding, because they believe in the fivefold ministry, and so they're like, well, you have a gift of evangelist, let's get all the evangelists out there to evangelize, right? Get them all to make this profession and get them into the church, right? And then we'll start discipling, which there's a whole big reason why that's wrong. Yeah. And we could talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. But because we have such a distinction between evangelism and discipleship, then our focus is, we just need to evangelize. We need to evangelize. And so at the end of the day, if Paul said, if you confess with the mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, and you'll be saved, hallelujah, that makes you a Christian. That's what we're going to do to get a bunch of people gain profession. And so as a missionary, this is what I'm taught, right? Yeah. So then I go overseas, whatever I have to do to get them to make a profession of faith, right? I'm going to do, right? And so what do we see in church history? We see a bunch of people do that, right? We see the Catholic Church do that. We see Puritans do that. We see this, well, we just got to get them to do this. And so out of, I don't know, whether it's desperation, whether it's out of a completely distorted view or whatever, they start making forces, or they start preaching, like, I don't want to say hellfire and brimstone, because there is a need for sometimes for stuff like that. But when it's always used as, this is how I'm going to get people to Jesus, right? Only for the sake of them making some type of profession, you know, and then
where's
even,
the love?
Yeah. And then nowadays, you know, you have a bunch of televangelists, you know, who, you know, 5,000 people, you know, all make these professions of faith, and then exactly what happens? They leave. Yeah. Right. They get their little check. Yep. They walk out with a big cash of money, with a big offering. You got a whole bunch of people who made a profession but have no idea what it means to become like Christ.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then, well, then what do you do with discipleship? Well, that's the next step for, and in the evangelical circles, get them to church, get them to do your. Well, I won't get that. We could talk about, like I said, we could jump into that. But for me, that's why I'm like, I think scripturally, we are called to preach the gospel. And I believe that there are going to be moments where you're going to have those moments like Peter, where you're going to stand up to a crowd and preach the gospel, right?
What is the gospel to you?
Oh, okay. So let me give you my journey of the gospel, okay? So when I was 9 years old, the gospel for me was Jesus Christ died for you. And you need to confess your sin to him, and he'll come into your heart and you'll be saved. So I was like, okay, well, Lord, I did all these sins, forgive me. All right. Turned 17. Then the gospel became, you actually need to surrender your life. Jesus Christ isn't just your savior, he's your Lord. You need to give him your life. Yeah. Okay. Well, Lord, I give you my life. And then recently it's been, no, Jesus Christ lived a life. He lived on this earth. And not only did he live on this earth, he lived a life where he met all the standards, right? But he just didn't meet all the standards. He represented a father who's been after your heart since the day that you gave your first breath. Yep. And then he died. He died not only to pay the penalty for sin, but to demonstrate the same father heart. Yeah. Right. And then he rose again. Yeah. Because in him rising, now you have life. Right. But then he sent his spirit. And in so receiving his spirit, now you are united with God. Not just in standing, but in reality. That's how I understand the gospel now. And I grew up mainly in the evangelical circle, and so I was taught the biggest thing is the cross. Yeah. The biggest thing is Jesus Christ died for your sin. You are now justified before God. Yeah. And honestly, it all became a theological thing, which I'm not saying that's wrong. It's true. You stand justified before God, or you stand in right standing with God. So, and so most of my focus was in the Lord will get me back to the cross. Get me back to the cross. When I struggle, Lord, I just need to see you as a slain lamb, or whatever, right? I just need to come back to the cross, I need to come back to dying to self. And then I came into the charismatic circle, and they're like, well, yeah, Jesus Christ died for you, but Peter preached that if you confess your sin, you receive the gift of God. That's a part of salvation. You receive the Spirit of God. I'm like, oh wow, okay. So then all these things come out of it, right? Yeah. But then the same thing for both of them is that it's all focused on getting you to heaven. At the end of the day, all the gospel is to get you to heaven. But the problem with that is that it doesn't deal with your humanity on the earth. And yes, what Adam and Eve did affected our eternity, meaning we if it wasn't for Jesus, there's no way into heaven, right? But God was also wanting to change the reality now. Because his heart is not just that we walk in some type of relationship with him, but his heart is that we are united with him so as to bring him down on the earth. And so the way that I've heard it is that the gospel that we preach in America, and it's not what the American gospel says, which is the prosperity gospel. The gospel that we as evangelicals and charismatics preach is a gospel that gets us ready for heaven but unfit for earth. But the true gospel gets you fit on earth and ready for heaven. And that part is what it means to be united with Christ, to actually receive what he has done. Okay. And the result of all that is just thank you. Yeah. It's not striving more. Yeah. It's not trying to work more. It's not trying to do anything more. You have received every spiritual blessing in heavenly places. Yeah. And so now it's thank you, Lord. How do I walk in that? Yeah. So that's why for me, that's why I share that progression. Yeah. Because for me, the gospel was this, and I think for a lot of people who listen, that's been the gospel. It's been the cross. Yeah. And then for others, it's been more of the gospel is more about the coming of the Spirit. And then for others, it's like, well, it's a whole mix. I don't really understand. And then at the end, for me, it was like, oh, I see the picture. Like it isn't just about just my sin. It's not just even about me. It's about a whole world that he loves and he's restoring. And he wants to see earth look just like heaven. And that's his heart. So, amen. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad how he's spoken to you over the years. He's really filled you with wisdom, if no one's ever told you that, and there's so many things, so much truth that you've said in that. I can talk and sit here and talk with you all night about this stuff, honestly, because I know we can go, but we're gonna wrap up here. Okay. With that, moving forward too, we've talked about this, and we'll tell everybody, because I think that we can go deeper into these conversations of discipleship leading into what revival is and that. So Nick and I are going to do a little series on discipleship into revival coming in the next coming months. Regardless of how we do that, we'll figure that out. But we'll get it out there. Just to let you guys know. So this isn't the last you'll see of them. We'll put that up there, and we for Nick and I, we really want to be praying in the Spirit about that before we just start talking about that, because I hear so many podcasts and people out there that talk about this stuff, and God bless them with everything, but I want to make sure that when we go into this, our hearts are ready and prepared and good for this. So that's awesome. So before you go, I have one final question for you that I usually ask everybody on here. If there was anybody out there listening that didn't believe in God or Jesus Christ, Yeshua Messiah, what would you say to that person?
That's a good question. Well, if a Marine buddy was sitting across, I would just simply say, if you don't believe in God, just ask him to show himself.
That's good. No one ever said that one before.
Because God is not a God who hides himself. Yeah. He is always looking to reveal himself. Yeah. Whether it doesn't matter how. Yeah. So I'd say ask God and just be ready to see how he reveals himself.
Wow. That's so cool. Well, guys, as always, you can find us on YouTube at Wallace Production. I didn't do this last time. I'm sorry. I didn't do this in my last interview. I always do this. This is my shtick, man. All right. Let's get ready. It's been a long time. As always, you can find us on YouTube at Wallace Production, WALLESS Production. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Talk to me. Also go to Talk to me at Patreon. Go to Patreon, look up Talk to Me. I'll be on there too if you feel led to give or anything like that. My friend, thank you. I am honestly so proud of you. I'm so gracious to have you in my life. You've been such an inspiration to me. You've really helped build me up over these past couple months with things, and I'm excited that your view of discipleship too is really shown with how you've reached out to myself and our other buddy. So it's been awesome to get to know you and walk with you.
Thank you.
Through this, man. This has been Nick Barr, everyone. If you have any questions for him, I'm sure he would love to answer them on Facebook or maybe somewhere. I don't know. Find him.
You'll find me on Facebook.
He'll be around.
Yeah, I'm around.
He'll be painting somewhere.
That's exactly right.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Have a good night.